Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Inrego's Circular Tech Talk. It's a true pleasure to have you all here, whether you are tuning in online or joining us here in person. My name is Isabel, and I am working at Inrego, and I'm your host for today. It is not every day that you get to learn directly from a pioneer. But today, guys, you do. This man, he's one of the founding fathers of the circular economy. He was one of the original members of Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and he has written many books. One of them in particularly famous called The Circular Economy, A Wealth of Flows. This man has spent years writing, researching, and teaching about the transformative potential of circularity. And his groundwork has led the work to the global shift that we are now seeing, moving from a linear, wasteful system into a circular, regenerative one that benefits both businesses and our planet. So today, he's here with us to share his vision on how we can transition into circular economy, and more particularly, how we can scale sustainable business. So with no further ado, I would like you all to join me in a warm welcome and a big applause to Mr. Ken Webster.
This microphone is working great. Does anybody need any stuff? You know? Wow. And we'll come back to this question of stuff and trying to keep track of it. But to start with, I'll just test my slide thing. Oh, it's good. I've done quite a number of books, but Isabel mentioned Wealth of Flows, probably one of the most influential. But what I want to do, I was asked to use just 2 or 3 minutes about how perspectives are shifting around circular economy, and then look into things which I think are quite challenging, but interesting as the circular economy matures and develops. I've only got 20 minutes, but we have time for questions, and I'm really looking forward to that. That's where a lot of the action will be. And to honor my good friend Walter Stahel, who is probably the real great-grandfather of circular economy, I just want to use a couple of his slides to bring out a key point. I don't know whether that's visible enough. It's probably just about okay. His point was that circular economy is about maintaining capitals, right? It's maintaining a stock of usable draw upon capital and having nutritious flows back to these capitals. So it's a stock maintenance concept. Here's some stock. It isn't about, well, we've got a throughput and we ought to make it less bad. It's about the perspective shifting. And he brings up 3 things importantly. On the point of sale is where he starts, or the point of use, sale or service. And he talks about maintaining value, quality, and quantity of stock. Now, this does, I'll just flip to the next one. It's got the list. You're familiar with his era of R. It's all of those things we're used to there. Reuse, repair, etc., etc. But coming back to this is only one part of a 3-part approach. The second one, I'll go 2 slides on. Hopefully it's in there. Top left, you've got the era of D. This is trying to get molecules back to being as pure as possible because they're going to be needed for manufacturing. Everything does come to its end. So end of service life is the way he puts it. Yes, he's got the lightning flash of innovative new materials coming through, of course. We know that from things like plastic packaging. It's low value. Recycling efforts are poor, shall we say, and it's not really very valuable at all. It's not this, where's the economic opportunity in that? Not so good. So perhaps redesigning those materials would be good. But he's bringing in something else too, which is less discussed, but I think that's where we are at the moment. Notice the bottom left, closing the liability loop. Okay, we're tracking it through reuse, repair, refurbish, all of that. And then at end of service, like we're trying to get pure molecules back, we will have known what's exactly in those products. Because how can we make sense of the era of delamination, decontamination, all of those elements, if we don't know what's in it? So we have to get pure as new materials, and that requires data about what's in it and how to separate it out. But he's adding in this, and has done it for years actually, but I think it's coming to the fore. Closing the liability loop, returning goods to their producer needs innovative policy making. Whose is this? Whose responsibility ultimately is it? Now, some people who have, say, indulged in a little platform called Temu from China have noticed a flood of materials coming into USA, Europe, wherever, very successful at selling exactly cheap things. But what happens to them? Are they durable? Is there a return possible? Who gets the responsibility of dealing with all of this? Much of it flows under the customs rule de minimis, which means it's not interfered with by customs because the value is below, I think in Europe it's 150 euros. So that's not going to be, what are you going to do with that? That closing the liability loop looks really, really difficult if we keep getting flooded with stuff, whether it's produced by ourselves or other people. And this is, I think, something that will match exactly well with all the data gathering. If we know what's in a product, we've got a materials passport, that's as we know, coming along pretty quickly. We've got the most value out of it in reuse, refurbish, and all of that. We want clean molecules so we can push that back into manufacturing, probably more locally. It doesn't have to go back to wherever it came from. You could capture it in Europe, in Sweden, in Finland, wherever. But what about this liability loop? Isn't that important too? And I think in a way the logic is there. You want nutrients that flow back into stocks. You don't want to go, what is this? There's a reason, you can't build new aircraft out of recycled aluminium. You know why? Because all aluminium is an alloy. And unless you're pretty damn sure where this aluminium has come from, you probably don't have an alloy that suits the aircraft business. It's always downcycled because aluminium is contaminated, has to be, with different elements depending upon its function. So it's no small task, we've got that. Now I want to bring up the challenge because I really don't have a huge amount of time, of course. And the challenge is this. We've had an economy on the left-hand side, I would argue, and so would people like Brett Christophers, that we are in a sort of rentier financialized economy built on huge scale on the enclosure of property rights. It's worked very well if you happen to be an IP holder, say, for some powerful drug. Ozempic comes to mind as one where there are fabulous profits because of the return to the IP. But we have an extraction, large-scale enclosure accumulate, and it's dominated by rentier and finance interest, which is from the ownership of assets. Now, what would happen if the circulate bit on the right-hand side, which fits so lovely as an opposite pole, I would argue, with small scale, add value with what you've got locally and regionally, circulate it like that, about notions of the commons, where you have access to resources, all of these things like the commons are rather words which are not in use so much now. What about distribution? What about makers and about productive businesses? These fit together. And maybe money isn't just a store of value, what can I get on my asset, but as a medium of exchange to help production, consumption, exchange. But we might end up, some people have said quite cleverly, a circular economy. Products, components, and materials will become new asset classes. Hey, perhaps we're one of the 3 or 4 top firms in this particular sector. Let's control the whole value chain. Without naming names, I've been in front of people from a gold mining company saying, how do we become materials managers? We're not just going to mine the gold and go, there you go. They're going to be saying, how do we get more of this product back? How do we control it? Should we buy the recyclers? What should we do? And so don't think that clever people are not thinking about products, components, and materials if they're specialist enough, if they're identifiable enough, as assets that they can get economic rents for. Because their challenge is, we don't want to keep selling more stuff. We want to be able to sell less stuff and get more money. Perhaps it can circulate 2 or 3 times. That's a good idea. So if we help control the value chain, maybe through our digital network, our platform, maybe we can control many more of these flows. Good idea, eh? Don't think people aren't thinking about this. Because it's a logic. Products, components, and materials are asset classes. Who controls it? And if we've got much more of this digital network, these platforms, we know where stuff is, who's got it, who's using it, what's in it, and where it goes, if it's valuable enough. Why not? They'll be looking at that. We know from digital networks that network effects mean that only a very few digital platforms dominate particular businesses in retail or whatever. They matter a great deal. Why do you think Rupert Murdoch was interested in buying Rightmove, which is a database of houses being offered for sale? He's got a little interest in houses? No, I don't think it is quite as naive as that. So maybe that's one challenge. What's to stop circular economy businesses controlling more and more of the market? And if I had more time, I could list some of the industries in which the 90% of control is down to, say, 4 firms. Looking at the American example, I'll just give you one. Meat processing in America, 4 companies dominate 90% of all meat processing. In the US, just 4 companies. Thousands of farmers, but the price makers are the meat processors. So that's a little bit of a dark side, but let's have a look at what's happening that might really energize the right-hand side so that Circulate doesn't end up on the left-hand side. Just look at this. I love these graphs. Oh my goodness, I love them so much. Because it just shows you what you get when places like IEA, Energy Institute, and whatever, Bloomberg, do their modeling. Rubbish. They pretty much just extrapolate a bit from what was happening then. The reality is the black line. That's where installations of solar have got to. That's an exponential curve, as you will all recognize. And why do we bother about that, apart from the fact that we underestimate how fast things might be changing? They're really changing very, very quickly. I would recommend reading Rethink X. It's a sort of think group. Tony Seba runs it. They made some predictions about the price of solar. Price of solar panels has fallen 90-odd% in 10 years. Batteries about 80%. So there is a solar, wind, and battery revolution ongoing, which makes the price of energy potentially very, very low and much more able to be localized. oh, we have energy to do things. Add in things like using renewables for green steel, using renewables to generate, I know in Finland, hydrogen so that they can feed hydrogen-eating bacteria with carbon dioxide and hydrogen, and you get some proteins out of it. Now, clearly I don't know the exact process, but if renewables are pretty cheap and everywhere, what couldn't you do, which you were quite restrained in doing before? So, if there is an increase in the intelligent devolution, as Walter says, of decentralization of production, where we gather in more materials that have flowed into us and we keep them and we process them and we know what's in them and where it goes, you might be able to see, with very cheap energy, you might be able to see that other side of the diagram popping up. You know, circular fits with all of these distributive forces which are going on. You know, there's not being restricted. It's like having the internet of energy, somebody said. You could just be able to get what you need. It also makes it a little difficult if you're trying to sell your business on carbon saving. Leave that with you for a moment. So that's interesting. I think we see I see, Tony Sieber sees, huge opportunities in circular economy based on local and regional thriving, using very cheap energy and accessible tools and materials. We can do it. A tool company was talking to me and says, how do we relate to tool libraries? We sell tools. What about tool libraries? How could we relate to them? And this prompts people to think of different configurations, and we're in a company that is really, really good at configuring stuff. So a couple more things. Artificial intelligence, everybody's got to mention it once in their talk at least. It's a bit fuzzy, but the best that I could do, it was my fault for the slide. But what can artificial intelligence do when it's helping sorting out materials? It can really help sort components. It can really encourage better decision-making about what stays and what is pushed on to other sorts of recycling. It can help with deconstructing products and components, along with some robot things there. And of course, it can manage a lot better the relationships with the customers. So that's likely to come along. And in a way, I don't want to go too much further than that, except saying I think we have to watch that challenge. I really hope that circular economy contributes more to the right-hand side and a thriving distributed economy than it does to the left-hand side. But that is going to take deliberate policy making. Small hints of it are things like, the right to repair. But I think Inrego is part of a very supportive move towards the right, not at tiny scale, but at very positive contribution to that, and enabling more equipment to be used for longer and to be maintained in circularity. I'm just going to end up with a single slide. This is probably a little bit too complicated, but it tries to draw in some of the things I've said. We're moving to renewables, yes, fossil energy. We had the last coal mine in Britain shut down yesterday. The last one, and you can consider how much coal Britain used to. In the beginning of the 20th century, 1.2 million workers were involved in coal industries, both digging it and burning it and processing in Britain. So it was 10% of the workforce at one time. Now it's all gone, along with the last fossil-powered blast furnace. So things are moving quickly. Innovation and redesign are really important. The DNA down the middle of this diagram, which is familiar to many people, is this idea that we track and trace and know what's happening. We really know where our materials and products are and who's doing what with it. Because then it makes sensible decisions about how to deal with it, Inrego, really, really much easier to do. But on the right and left-hand side, this idea of capitals. we do want to rebuild natural and social capital. It's not about doing a little less harm, remember. It's about designing a system that would improve, well, some people would say nature positive, particularly on that, obviously, bio side. And most of the right-hand side is really about extending service life. Too many people, I just put it as a upcycle and recycle. That's a minor thing, and yet is a major thing at the moment, because that's an evidence of a linear economy still dominant, because so much attention is paid to recycling. But here, recovering atoms pure as new molecules is good. And that's what I'm going to leave you with, in a way, that I think with this DNA strand, if we can establish it in the circular economy, we'll be able to move even faster. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ken, for that presentation. Let's give him another round of applause. You can sit down here if you would like. Now, to continue this insightful conversation, I would like to bring up two more experts in this field. We will have a short panel discussion, and by the end of that session, you will also take some questions from the audience. So if you have a thought in mind, a question in mind, keep that thought and be ready for that. Okay, so first of all, we have Anders Wikman, who's going to soon join us up on stage, or already now. Give him a warm applause. Anders Wikman is a famous opinion maker and a Swedish author. He's a member of International Resource Panel and Club of Rome. His work and leadership have made him a leading voice in sustainability, advocating for lasting change in how we can approach both businesses and environmental challenges. Moreover, this man turned, can I say? He turned 80 years old yesterday, so give him applause. He has a long and wide experience within the environmental sector.
That's nothing to brag about.
He's in environmental Sweden, one of the longest, has probably the longest CV of us all in this area. And alongside of Anders, I would like to bring up Henrik Nilsson. Give him a warm round of applause. Henrik Nilsson is the founder and CEO of this very company, Inrego. And his leadership has turned the vision of a circular economy into reality. Since 1995, Henrik has driven Inrego's mission to bring IT practices into the forefront of business, proving that circular economy, it's not just a theory and an ideal, no, it's a working solution. So thank you all for being here. And Anders and Ken, you have both contributed to significant reports recently, such as Earth for All and Bend the Trend. Bend the Trend was published by the UN Environment Programme, stating that we must decouple material use from the economy to successfully reach a sustainable development. And I think this is very interesting, but could also be hard, since we have a lot of companies here today eager to get into their circular transition, but might be dependent on their material use. What advice would you like to give them today?
Well, I think one of the conclusions in the Bend the Trend report is that the cost structure of the economy is flawed. And very often it's less expensive to source virgin materials as compared to secondary materials. And that makes it very difficult for companies, even those who have a commitment, because they cannot sort of continuously do something that is more expensive than what their competitors are doing. So I think the cost structure is one of the areas, and there you have to push pressure on policymakers, because the market will not solve this by itself. That's obvious. So I think that's one of the main issues. Another issue is, of course, to advocate new business models. Ken was alluding to Walter Stahel. He wrote a book already in 2010 called The Performance Economy, urging companies to offer performance, not products. And it's a very good book. It's readable still today. But I think most people haven't really thought about it. And most business models are made up in a way that the more throughput of materials, the more revenue you earn. So we have to rethink business models, and that's not easy. Because if you sell something and then you have no responsibility any longer, you do get all the cash, and then you can move on. If you offer something as a service, it's a totally different financial model. So it's not easy, but I think we have to discuss these details, and we have to bring in policymakers, because they must assist.
Thank you. It's very interesting, and this is something you have managed to do for many years now, almost 30 years, winning prizes for your hard work. What do you think is the keys, in your opinion, to make people choose circular and sustainable solutions instead of the resource-heavy products that you can find on the traditional market?
In one way, I think it's quite easy, because I think we need to make these products cheaper and also better than liner products to make people choose. I think we should have big respect for people's wallets. They of a lot of reasons take care of the money, of course, and wants and needs the cheapest solutions. But I also think we could give people a better shopping experience, because I think all of us know the problem. What shall we do with the products that we bought? Shall we sell it on Blocket, or shall we throw it away, or what should we do with it? We have a problem with the product when we are finished with it. And I think that's a possibility for companies to take care of the process from the point of sales, as you talked about, particularly for Inrego, for instance. I mean, we love our products. We want them back. And I think all the products we have here, we should never let them go. We should always try to get them back again and turn them around, as you said.
Yeah. And talking about that taxation shift, you both have written a lot about. Would you like to elaborate on that, Ken?
Yeah, thanks for that question. If you're going to have prices revealing full costs, you know, the social, environmental costs, the consumer is going to be paying more. And consumers are perhaps, of course, not going to love that. However, you can think about this really quite differently. If, for instance, a bit like, say, the Alaska Permanent Fund, people in the extractive industries are paying a fee into a fund, which is then generating profits. I look over towards Norway, perhaps, or a slightly similar model, but then handing out the benefits as a basic dividend. In other words, everybody gets, in a way, a compensation for the fact that the prices are now telling the truth. So they won't be worse off, and you could apply that principle to other economic rents earned from resource capture. Is it carbon emissions? Yeah, we'll put a fee on that, and the dividend will get paid into a fund and distributed, so that the poor can at least afford it. And when they, at least it got as far as the House of Representatives, the Schultz-Baker plan in about 2018, they recognized that the modeling would show that US citizens would get about $5,000 a year, which would enable most of the people who would be badly affected by rising materials and products prices because of these fees would be compensated, and those who earned lots more than that would be encouraged to behave more conservation-mindedly, but they can afford it, you see. So if you just put the prices up, people go, oh, forget it, you know, because we're having trouble already. You know, cost of living, what? They want it as cheap as possible. I mentioned Temu. How cheap do you want your shirt? You know, I could probably pay for all of you to have a shirt from Temu, because the costs don't reflect anything near. In fact, it's subsidized. So I see, and Anders and I have had many discussions about this, that a fee dividend system would help us to charge real prices for resource extraction without making the poor poorer. And yes, everybody gets it, but if you pay tax further on up the scale, you're getting some of that back anyway. So that's one proposal that showed up in Earth for All's, the Club of Rome Earth for All publication.
Please.
Yeah, and if you haven't read it, there is also a Swedish translation, En jord för alla, but I think the English version is better. The translation is not very good. But we were quite excited when we wrote the book about this idea that Ken was introducing. And most people have probably not heard about it. But as Ken said, in Norway they are trying to approach it now. In Alaska, they have already put it in place. So each Alaskan, including babies, last year received, I think, in the range of $3,000 per capita as a dividend from this resource fund, regenerated fund. And I think it's fair, because why should those who happen to sit on a particular resource, why should they get 100% of the revenue? It's very strange in a way. And I think this idea with a dividend is really, really exciting. And I think, Ken, we have to write more about it.
Yes.
Ken has written several papers on it as well that you can access. In Norway, they tried now, most recently, to do something about the salmon factories. You know, they earn a lot of revenue. And they wanted to put a fee on the salmon factory companies. And there was an outrage among these billionaires who own the factories. They all of a sudden felt very poor, and they said, then we will emigrate to Switzerland. And some of them even did. But it was a huge political debate around this. And in reality, it was a very sensible proposition that everybody should just applaud. So there is a lot of ideology involved, of course, but I think it's a very, very interesting approach.
I think so too, and putting that ideology into real practice here, you often talk about that our biggest competitor is time, and I think it comes into this as well. Would you like to elaborate on that? Why so?
Before I do, I just say I love your mustache. You know, we guys in the circular economy, we have mustaches. So,
so you mean I should do something?
Me too.
Maybe. I mean, time is the input to the circular economy. That's our resource. What we actually do is to swap virgin material to labor and time is the only thing we have. And I think that is very interesting, because that's also the problem, because what we tax in society today is labor. Labor is a sustainable resource, and that is the one we tax. And because of our input is time, and that's very heavily taxed, we have a difficulty to compare with the linear economy. As you mentioned, these companies just putting out products on the market, they do it very, very cheap. If we are going to restore a computer, or restore a share or whatever, we need to put time in it. And that also means that we need to be so good at what we are doing, and we must be so efficient of what we are doing, and we must be so focused on doing the right thing to be able to compete with the linear economy today. And that is a problem. I think these things will turn out in different ways. I mean, you talked about AI. We have a lot of automatization, digitalization, which we can use. But we are 100 years after the linear economy in developing those systems. We have to develop themselves also. We can't buy computer systems that help us doing the refurbishing of computers. So we have to develop it ourselves. So time is really our big thing.
May I just add something in that indeed, why are we taxing renewables like people? Really? Why? Why are we doing this? Why aren't we taxing those things that we don't like waste, like using resources, like unearned income? You know, it is quite perverse if you're trying to run a factory with people and they are all pretty solidly taxed. Whereas the resources, we can get that really cheaply. It doesn't make too much sense, since added value requires that human intervention. As Henrik said, it's going to take a long time for AI to do anything about it. But mentioning AI, there could be this as a final reason to have something like a basic dividend developing, is who's going to be doing what exactly in the future. We based our economies post-World War II on people having a job all the time, and then they can pay into their welfare, and then they get that back as a pension, and unemployment will be kept up, and factories will be kept busy in particular countries. It worked well for 30, 40 years, but it's not the same place now. We're suffering chronic insecurity of income. And if we want people to be more creative with a circular economy, a basic dividend can help give them time to explore what they want to get involved in. That's another benefit if you're taking away some of the economic insecurity. So it's a direction of travel which is complementary to a better use of resources, I would say.
Mention it like this, I mean, it's ridiculous that we actually tax labor. We shouldn't do it. I mean, but the problem is that I think 70-80% of the income in a normal country is coming from labor taxes. So it needs quite, what do you say? System shift and political people that are very brave to swap these. And that will take time. As I said, we are 100 or 200 years after the economy we have created, the linear economy. And what we taxed was labor. So it's, it will take some time.
Tickles the thought.
I think it may be difficult to do in an individual country like Sweden. By the way, the first time I heard about an ecological tax reform, lowering taxes on labor and increasing them of the user resources, was by Ernst von Weizsäcker in 1989 at a big, I think it was the Volvo Environment Prize ceremony in Copenhagen, in Gothenburg. So we have been talking about this for quite some time. But it may be difficult for an individual country, but the EU is a big enough market. So it could be done within the EU. And I think the Commission is trying to do something in this area. The problem in the EU is that on taxation, there is a rule that you need consensus. You don't have the majority decision making. And that's an old issue. And Sweden has been one of the countries, by the way, who didn't want the EU to interfere in taxation. So it's a difficult issue, but still I think it's doable, and we have to move in this direction. Otherwise, I think circularity it will move on, but it will not become mainstream in the short term. I would also like to say another issue that we have to really look at is education and mindset. I remember I was at the launch of the European Bauhaus conference outside Helsinki a few years ago. European Bauhaus, by the way, is quite interesting because it's about wood in construction, the big way. But there the head of the architect school in Oslo, he said, from now on in our curricula for new architects, we spend 70% of the time on refurbishment, renovation, instead of building new buildings, because we believe that we already have the stock that we need for the foreseeable future. So we have to make better use of that stock. And I think that's a way of seeing things, and that's a mindset shift that we really need.
Super interesting.
I just want to add about looking at the bright side, which I always try to do. I mean, imagine how much possibility to green jobs we have to create in this industry. we can create so many jobs and we can get so many people into different jobs in this, and we can create green jobs. So it's just a marvelous opportunity we have.
Thank you. And now we have a quick minute or two to have questions from the audience. Do we have anyone? Yeah, interesting. We have a microphone running towards you right now. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation and discussion. My name is Simon Jaffanelén. I work as a head of sustainability in a real estate company. And like many companies in the European Union, we're preparing for corporate sustainability directive, reporting next year. And we have one of the standards in circular economy that's material for our business. So my question, very practical, I'm going to start with the strategy and developing the strategy that we're going to work with circular economy. What's your recommendation for a company that will start, next week, I have to start, developing the strategy?
Love it.
Now you have the time to set the first recommendation.
I think you can elaborate this. I just said do it. So.
The role of materials passports is key. What is in your buildings, and how is it built for disassembly? Is it built for refurbishment? You know, the new Triodos Bank in Holland, they designed it for disassembly, and they know how many screws they've used in the building, and they've designed it to be remodeled and reshaped or taken down if necessary. So that's longer term thinking, but know what it is you have, and it adds actually value to the building. You know, I am involved with them, but Medasta Foundation allows real estate developers and others to identify the value of their materials in their buildings, which helps them, instead of just losing it all in demolition, by the way, both with design and with adding to the balance sheet if this is a redeveloped site. You know what you've got, is my key pointer.
Materials, of course, are very, very important, but so is the use of energy. And we know in Sweden that even if our buildings are quite well insulated, we have still a lot to gain by using energy more efficiently. I was recently in Örebro. They have a big a real estate company owned by the community, Öbostäder. I think it's about 20,000 apartments. They have done a lot to reduce energy use and to reduce heating and cooling, just by being very, very smart and by going local, by being trying to make them less and less dependent on the central grid. Solar energy on the roofs. They also benefit from batteries of electric vehicles in the parking lots, etc. So it's fascinating. So you can do a lot there, and maybe in the future, energy will become very, very cheap, and energy efficiency will not be as important if energy is 100% clean. But we are not there yet, and we have a long transition period. So I think to focus a lot on energy efficiency. Call energy efficiency företagen, Lotta Bongens, and ask her for some advice.
Call Lotta Bongens.
Thank you.
Good.
Not Charlotta, Lotta.
Lotta. Good. Okay, actually, time is moving quick. And as we are wrapping up this, I would like...
But we have one thing we have not talked about. We have had for many years the producer responsibility in several product areas. The problem with that has been that there is no obligation with the producer to make sure that what has been collected after use is also made into efficient use again. It's just the responsibility of collection. And I know I was chairing the Swedish recycling industry for quite some time. And most of what we collected, we couldn't do anything with it because the design was so poor. So we should really point the finger at the producers in this process. They should be responsible not only for collection, and that you can fix by just buying yourself somebody else does it for you, you pay a fee. but really make sure that we really get circularity and that the molecules come back.
Very interesting. Yeah. So what key messages would you like to give the audience here today so that they can go home and start with their transition already today? Quick and short, one of you. Would you like to start, Ken?
Yeah, maintain capitals. That's the different perspective. Maintain value in capitals. That's all.
Thank you.
As a practical person I am, it's on our screens, on all our screens. Just do it.
Well, if you're interested in change in this area, you have to put pressure on policymakers. And I've been a policymaker for part of my life, and I know that most of them don't know much about this stuff. They are not very knowledgeable. So take for granted that some of them at least will be receptive. So put pressure on them. Write to politicians. Write and tell them, for heaven's sake, do something about this.
Thank you so much. Give them a huge round of applause. And you can actually keep that applause going for yourself for being here in person or tuning in online. Thank you so much for taking your time to learn more about the circular economy. And I hope it's been an inspiring session, and I hope you leave with fresh ideas and a renewed passion for circularity. And now it's actually up to you to take these ideas into practice and turn them into action, to write to politicians and to maintain, sorry, what did you say? Maintain
capitals.
Maintain the capitals, and just do it. Okay. Thank you so much for joining here today. They're staying here to talk to you right after and talk to one another. We have so many influential people here today. That was all. Have a great day.